In the ancient history of Unova, there was a single dragon. This dragon was so powerful that it helped two brothers unite the entire region, bringing peace and prosperity to the land. But the brothers began to disagree about how to lead. The older brother believed in truth, in facts and reality as the foundation for decisions. The younger brother believed in ideals, in vision and principles that could shape a better future. Their conflict grew so intense that the dragon itself could not remain whole. It split into three beings: Reshiram, the white dragon of truth; Zekrom, the black dragon of ideals; and Kirim, the frozen husk left behind when truth and ideals were torn apart. This legend, passed down through generations in Unova, became the foundation for everything Team Plasma would claim to stand for. Tonight, we're going to explore the complete story of Team Plasma, from its origins in ancient mythology to its violent collapse. This is the lore behind one of Pokémon's most complex villainous organizations. Team Plasma didn't begin as a criminal organization, at least not in the eyes of the people of Unova. When they first appeared in public, they presented themselves as activists, as liberators fighting for the rights of Pokémon who had been enslaved by human trainers. Their message was simple and compelling. Pokémon are not tools for humans to use. They are living beings with their own thoughts and feelings, and keeping them in Pokéballs is no different from slavery. The only moral choice is to release your Pokémon and let them live free in the wild, as nature intended. This message resonated with people. Team Plasma members would gather in town squares and deliver speeches about Pokémon liberation. They wore robes that made them look like monks or priests, giving them an air of religious authority. They spoke with passion about ending the suffering of Pokémon, about creating a world where humans and Pokémon could coexist without the power imbalance that Pokéballs created. And many people in Unova listened. Some even released their Pokémon, convinced by Team Plasma's arguments that keeping them was cruel. But this public face of Team Plasma was built on a lie. The organization had no intention of liberating Pokémon or creating a more equal world. It was designed from the beginning as a tool for one man's ambition, and that man was Ghetsis Harmonia. Ghetsis was the true leader of Team Plasma, though he rarely presented himself that way in public. He preferred to operate from the shadows, letting others deliver the speeches and recruit new members while he orchestrated the organization's real goals. Ghetsis' plan was brilliant in its deception. If Team Plasma could convince the people of Unova to release their Pokémon, then the only people left with Pokémon would be Team Plasma itself. In a region without trainers, without gym leaders, without anyone capable of fighting back, Team Plasma would have complete control. Ghetsis would effectively rule Unova, commanding an army of Pokémon while everyone else had voluntarily disarmed themselves. The liberation message wasn't about freeing Pokémon, it was about eliminating competition. To make this plan work, Ghetsis needed more than just rhetoric. He needed a figurehead, someone who could embody Team Plasma's ideals and convince people that the organization was genuine. He needed someone pure, someone who truly believed that Pokémon should be free, someone who could speak about liberation with absolute sincerity because they didn't know they were lying. He needed N. N is one of the most tragic characters in Pokémon history, and his story begins long before the events of Black and White. His full name is Natural Harmonia Gropius, though most people only know him by the single letter. Ghetsis raised N from childhood, though the exact nature of their relationship has never been fully explained. Ghetsis calls himself N's father, but whether this is biological or adoptive is left ambiguous. What matters is that Ghetsis had complete control over N's upbringing, and he used that control to shape N into the perfect tool for his plan. N was isolated from other humans for most of his childhood. He lived in a castle, surrounded only by Pokémon and a select few members of Team Plasma who Getsis trusted to maintain the illusion. The Pokémon that N grew up with were not random wild Pokémon. They were Pokémon that had been abused or mistreated by humans. Pokémon with scars and trauma that Getsis deliberately brought to N's attention. This was calculated. By showing N only the worst examples of human and Pokémon relationships, Getsis ensured that N would grow up believing all humans were cruel to Pokémon. N developed an unusual ability during his isolated childhood. He could hear the voices of Pokémon, understanding their thoughts and feelings in a way that normal trainers could not. Whether this ability was something he was born with or something that developed because of his unique upbringing is never made clear. But the ability was real. N could communicate with Pokémon on a level that seemed almost supernatural, and this gift became central to his identity and his role in Team Plasma. Getsis told N that he was special, that his ability to understand Pokémon meant he was chosen for a great purpose. He told N about the legend of the original dragon, about how it split into Reshiram and Zekrom because of human conflict. He told N that he was destined to awaken one of these legendary dragons and use its power to separate the Pokémon world from the human world, creating a paradise where Pokémon could live free from human interference. And N believed him. Why wouldn't he? Getsis was the only father figure N had ever known, and everything N had experienced supported the story Getsis was telling. The other key figures in Team Plasma's leadership were the 7 Sages. These were men who served as Getsis's inner circle, advisors and lieutenants who helped run the organization's operations. Their names were Getsis, Gorm, Bronius, Rude, Zinzalin, Giallo, and Ryoku. Each sage had their own role within Team Plasma's structure, managing different aspects of the organization, from recruitment to logistics to public relations. But not all of the 7 sages were aware of Getsis's true intentions. Some of them genuinely believed in the liberation ideology. They thought they were part of a movement to help Pokémon, and they saw Getsis as a visionary leader working toward a noble goal. Rude, in particular, seemed to truly care about Pokémon welfare and believed that Team Plasma's mission was righteous. Others, like Zinzolin, were more cynical and understood that Team Plasma was about gaining power, but they went along with it because they benefited from the organization's success. Getsis himself was the exception. He never believed in liberation. To him, Pokémon were tools, weapons to be used in his quest for control over Unova. He kept a team of powerful Pokémon, including a Hydreigon that he had raised to be vicious and loyal only to him. This Hydreigon would later become infamous as one of the most dangerous Pokémon any villain in the series had ever used, a dark and dragon type with incredible power and a moveset designed purely for domination. The philosophy that Team Plasma presented to the public was carefully crafted to appeal to people's emotions. They would point to examples of Pokémon being used in battles, getting injured, fainting from exhaustion. They would ask questions like, how would you feel if someone captured you and forced you to fight? They would show Pokémon in Pokeballs and compare it to imprisonment, arguing that no living being should be confined in such a small space. And for people who didn't think too deeply about it, who took these arguments at face value, it sounded reasonable. But the philosophy fell apart under scrutiny. Pokémon in the games are shown to enjoy battling. They grow stronger through battles. They form genuine bonds with their trainers. The relationship between trainer and Pokémon is presented as partnership, not slavery. Team Plasma's rhetoric ignored all of this, focusing only on the negative possibilities while pretending the positive aspects didn't exist. It was propaganda, designed to manipulate rather than to inform. N, however, didn't see it as propaganda. He saw it as truth. His entire worldview had been constructed by Getsis to make him believe that humans and Pokémon could not coexist peacefully as long as humans had Pokeballs. Every Pokémon N had met in his childhood had been hurt by humans. Every story he'd been told reinforced the idea that trainers were oppressors. So when Team Plasma began its public campaign, N was the perfect spokesperson because he wasn't acting. He genuinely believed every word he said. The plan Getsis had set in motion required N to awaken either Reshiram or Zekrom. According to Nova legend, these dragons would only appear to someone who embodied their respective ideals. Reshiram seeks those who pursue truth, while Zekrom seeks those who pursue ideals. Getsis had raised N to be someone who purely believed in his ideals, someone whose conviction was so absolute that Zekrom would recognize him as worthy. And if N could summon and control a legendary dragon, Team Plasma's conquest of Nova would be unstoppable. But there was a risk in this plan that Getsis either didn't foresee or didn't care about. By raising N to be genuinely idealistic, by making him someone who truly believed in liberation and justice, Getsis created someone who might eventually see through the lies. N's purity was necessary for the plan to work, but it also made him vulnerable to having his worldview challenged. If N ever encountered a trainer who treated their Pokémon with genuine love and respect, if he ever saw evidence that contradicted what Getsis had told him, the entire foundation of his beliefs might crumble. This vulnerability would become critical later in the story, but in the early days of Team Plasma, before N had encountered the player character, before he'd seen examples of positive human and Pokémon relationships, he was completely devoted to the cause. He believed he was destined to save Pokémon from human cruelty. He believed that awakening the legendary dragon was his sacred duty, and he believed that Getsis was a wise and caring father figure who only wanted what was best for Pokémon and for the world. Everything that would happen in Nova, all the conflicts and revelations and betrayals that would define Pokémon Black and White, started with this foundation: a legendary dragon split by conflict, a man who wanted power and built an organization based on lies to get it, a boy raised in isolation and indoctrinated to believe those lies were truth, and a region full of people who had to decide whether to trust Team Plasma's message or reject it. This was the beginning of Team Plasma's story, and it would end with castles rising from the earth and legendary dragons clashing in the sky. Team Plasma didn't appear overnight as a fully formed organization. It grew methodically, carefully building its public image while establishing the infrastructure needed for Getsis's actual goals. The organization operated on two levels: the public-facing liberation movement that recruited believers and influenced public opinion, and the hidden inner workings where Getsis's true followers carried out operations that had nothing to do with freeing Pokémon. The organizational structure of Team Plasma was designed like a pyramid. At the very top was Getsis, though he rarely presented himself as the leader in public settings. Below him were the 7 sages, the inner circle who managed different aspects of the operation. Below the sages were various ranked members, including scientists, tacticians, and enforcers. And at the bottom were the grunts, the foot soldiers who wore the knight-like uniforms and carried out Team Plasma's public demonstrations and minor operations. Each of the 7 sages had distinct responsibilities within the organization. Getsis himself oversaw everything, making the major strategic decisions and maintaining control over Zinzolin, who appeared to be Ghetsis' most trusted lieutenant, handled operations that required a more aggressive approach. He was colder than the other sages, more willing to use force and intimidation when Team Plasma's gentle persuasion wasn't enough. Rude was different from the others. He genuinely cared about Pokémon welfare and seemed to believe that Team Plasma's stated mission was real. He would later become important during Team Plasma's collapse, as one of the few sages who recognized the organization's corruption and tried to make amends. But during the height of Team Plasma's power, Rude worked diligently to spread the liberation message, not realizing he was helping Ghetsis' scheme. Gorm, Bronius, Giallo, and Ryoku filled supporting roles, managing logistics, recruitment, and regional operations. They ensured Team Plasma had the resources and manpower to execute larger plans. Some of them understood that liberation was just a cover story. Others were true believers like Rude, but all of them followed Ghetsis' directives, whether they understood the real endgame or not. Below the Seven Sages, Team Plasma employed scientists who worked on technology and Pokémon research. The most significant of these would later be Colress, though he wouldn't officially join Team Plasma until after the events of Black and White. During the organization's first rise to power, their scientific division focused on understanding legendary Pokémon, studying the myths and legends of Unova to determine how N could successfully awaken either Reshiram or Zekrom. The grunts who made up the bulk of Team Plasma's visible presence were a mix of true believers and opportunists. Many of them genuinely thought they were part of a righteous cause. They'd been recruited through Team Plasma's public demonstrations, convinced by speeches about Pokémon suffering and human cruelty. These grunts would stand in town squares, hand out pamphlets, and try to persuade trainers to release their Pokémon. They believed they were doing good work, but Team Plasma also had enforcers, members who understood the organization's real nature and acted accordingly. These were the ones who would steal Pokémon from trainers, claiming it was liberation, but really just taking valuable Pokémon for Team Plasma's own use. They were the ones who would threaten people who opposed Team Plasma's message, who would vandalize property and intimidate communities into compliance. The friendly monks handing out pamphlets and the thugs stealing Pokémon were part of the same organization, serving the same ultimate goal. The recruitment strategy Team Plasma used was sophisticated. They didn't just approach random people and ask them to join a criminal organization. They started with public outreach, holding demonstrations where they would show footage or images of Pokémon in distress. They'd bring abused Pokémon to these events, Pokémon that Ghetsis had deliberately sought out or even arranged to be mistreated, and they'd present these Pokémon as evidence that the trainer system was fundamentally broken. Young people were particularly susceptible to Team Plasma's message. Teenagers and young adults who were idealistic, who wanted to make the world better, who felt powerless in their normal lives. Team Plasma offered them purpose and community. They offered a clear moral framework where releasing Pokémon was good and keeping them was bad, no nuance required. And they offered the satisfaction of being part of something larger than themselves, a movement that claimed it would change Unova forever. The public perception of Team Plasma during their rise was complicated. Some people saw them as heroes, brave activists standing up for Pokémon rights in a society that took Pokémon captivity for granted. Others saw them as naive extremists who didn't understand the actual relationship between trainers and Pokémon. And some saw through the facade entirely, recognizing Team Plasma as a cult or a scam built around charismatic manipulation. Gym leaders and other authority figures in Unova were generally skeptical of Team Plasma. They'd seen how Pokémon and trainers worked together, how battles strengthened bonds rather than damaged them, how Pokémon actively chose to stay with trainers they respected. Clay, the Driftvale City gym leader, was particularly outspoken against Team Plasma, calling them out as frauds and troublemakers. Lenora, the Nakrini City gym leader, took issue with Team Plasma's simplistic worldview and their refusal to engage with counter-arguments. But Team Plasma's influence grew despite this opposition. They established a presence in multiple cities across Unova. They had safe houses, meeting locations, and storage facilities where they kept Pokémon they'd convinced trainers to surrender or simply stolen. They built a network of supporters who would provide information, resources, and cover for Team Plasma operations. And they did all of this while maintaining the public image of peaceful activists who just wanted Pokémon to be free. The liberation ideology that Team Plasma promoted was built on several key arguments. First, they claimed that Pokeballs were prisons, that keeping Pokémon confined in such small spaces was inherently cruel. Second, they argued that Pokémon battles were forced combat, that Pokémon didn't actually want to fight and were only doing so because their trainers commanded them. Third, they suggested that the entire trainer culture of Unova was built on exploitation, turning Pokémon into tools for human ambition. Each of these arguments had surface-level appeal, but fell apart when examined closely. Pokeballs in the Pokémon world aren't depicted as torture devices. Pokémon can exit their Pokeballs voluntarily in many situations, and the games show Pokémon being comfortable and even protective of their Pokeballs. Battles are consistently portrayed as something Pokémon enjoy, a way for them to test their strength and grow. And the relationship between trainers and Pokémon is shown throughout the games as genuine partnership built on mutual respect. But Team Plasma wasn't interested in honest debate. They were interested in persuasion, in getting people to act on emotion rather than careful thought. They would show images of a fainted Pokémon and ask, "Is this what you want for your partner?" They would describe the inside of a Pokéball as a prison cell, even though the games suggest it's more like a comfortable resting space. They would frame every aspect of training in the most negative possible light, because their goal wasn't truth, it was conversion. N played a crucial role in this recruitment and persuasion effort. When he appeared at Team Plasma demonstrations, people listened. He wasn't like the other members who seemed to be delivering rehearsed speeches. N spoke with absolute conviction, with genuine pain in his voice when he talked about Pokémon suffering. He could point to specific Pokémon in the crowd and describe what they were feeling, demonstrating his unique ability to communicate with them. This wasn't a trick or a performance, and really could hear Pokémon voices, and when he said a Pokémon was unhappy or in pain, he was reporting what he actually perceived. This made N incredibly effective as Team Plasma's face. People who might have dismissed the organization's regular members as zealots or con artists had a harder time dismissing N. He was clearly different. He was clearly sincere, and his ability to understand Pokémon seemed to give him authority on the subject that normal humans couldn't claim. If someone who could actually hear what Pokémon were thinking said that keeping them in Pokéballs was wrong, didn't that mean something? What N didn't realize was that his sample of Pokémon was biased. Getsus had carefully controlled which Pokémon N encountered throughout his life. The Pokémon N heard from were almost exclusively ones that had been mistreated, traumatized, or stolen from abusive trainers. N had never met a Pokémon that genuinely loved its trainer. He'd never encountered a Pokémon that was happy to battle and grow stronger alongside a human partner. His ability to hear Pokémon voices was real, but his understanding of what those voices represented was completely warped by Getsus's manipulation. Team Plasma's operations during this period included some activities that were clearly criminal, even if the organization tried to justify them as liberation. They broke into Pokémon centers and stole Pokémon, claiming they were freeing them. They infiltrated the Dream Yard in Striaton City, causing damage and disrupting research. They took over the relic castle in the desert, using it as a base of operations. And they constantly harassed trainers, particularly young trainers, trying to convince them to release their Pokémon or simply taking the Pokémon by force. The organization also began preparing for the endgame of Getsis's plan. They researched the locations of the Dark Stone and Light Stone, the artifacts that contained the dormant Reshiram and Zekrom. They studied the legends about what would cause these dragons to awaken, what kind of person they would respond to, what conditions needed to be met. And they prepared N for his role in awakening one of these legendary Pokémon, training him not in battle skills but in conviction, strengthening his belief in the liberation ideal until it was absolute. Getsis also began construction on N's castle, though this was done in complete secrecy. The castle would later emerge from underground beneath the Pokémon League, but during this period, it was being built far from public view. The castle was massive, containing throne rooms, battle facilities, and living quarters for N and the Seven Sages. It was designed to be a symbol of Team Plasma's power, a structure that would rise up and demonstrate to all of Unova that the old order was finished and a new era had begun. The public didn't know about the castle. They didn't know about Getsis's true plans. They didn't know that Team Plasma's leadership had no intention of releasing their own Pokémon after convincing everyone else to do so. They saw the demonstrations, heard the speeches, and watched as their friends and neighbors debated whether Team Plasma might be right. And slowly, the organization's influence grew, setting the stage for the confrontation that would come when a young trainer from Nuvema town began their journey and encountered N for the first time. N's first encounter with the player happens in Accumula town, right after the player receives their starter Pokémon from Professor Juniper. Team Plasma is holding a demonstration in the town square, and N is there, listening to the grunts deliver their speeches about liberation. But when N sees the player, something changes. He approaches them specifically, asking to see their Pokémon, and after a brief conversation, he challenges them to a battle. This battle is significant because it's the first time N encounters a trainer who might contradict everything Getsis taught him. The player has just started their journey. Their Pokémon is low level, freshly received from the professor. But even in this brief battle, N can hear what the player's Pokémon is saying, and what he hears doesn't match his expectations. The Pokémon isn't miserable. It isn't crying out to be freed. It's battling willingly, maybe even enjoying the challenge. N wins this first battle easily because his Pokémon are higher level and he has more experience, but something about the encounter stays with him. He tells the player that their Pokémon is talking about them, that it likes them. This is confusing for N because it contradicts the fundamental belief he's built his entire identity around. If this Pokémon is happy with its trainer, if it's not suffering in captivity, then what does that mean for everything Team Plasma stands for? But N doesn't abandon his beliefs based on one encounter. He's been raised his entire life to think a certain way. One contradictory experience isn't enough to overturn years of indoctrination. Instead, N tries to rationalize what he's seeing. Maybe this Pokémon is unusual. Maybe it's too young to understand that it should want freedom. Maybe the player just started their journey and hasn't had time to mistreat their Pokémon yet. N finds ways to explain away the evidence that challenges his worldview. The player encounters N several more times throughout their journey across Unova. Each time, N challenges them to a battle, and each time, he hears the player's Pokémon speaking fondly of their trainer. In Nimbasa City, he battles the player again and seems even more troubled by what he's hearing. The player's team has grown stronger. The Pokémon have been through multiple gym battles and wild encounters. By all of Team Plasma's logic, these Pokémon should be exhausted, traumatized, desperate for freedom. But they're not. They're happy. They trust their trainer. They want to keep battling and growing stronger together. N starts to show signs of doubt, but he can't fully process what he's experiencing. Getsus has prepared him for this possibility by telling him that most Pokemon have been so thoroughly brainwashed by their trainers that they don't understand they're being oppressed. N has been taught that Pokemon who claim to be happy with their trainers are suffering from a kind of false consciousness, unable to recognize their own exploitation. So when he hears happy Pokemon, N interprets it as evidence of how deeply the corruption runs, not as evidence that his beliefs might be wrong. Throughout these encounters, the player also repeatedly runs into Team Plasma, causing problems across Unova. They're stealing Pokemon in Wellspring Cave. They're harassing the Nakreen Museum. They're taking over the Relic Castle. And while the Grunts claim they're liberating Pokemon, their actions look more like standard criminal activity. The Pokemon they take aren't being released into the wild. They're being brought back to Team Plasma facilities. The liberation message starts to seem hollow when the organization's actual behavior contradicts it. N is kept separate from most of these operations. He isn't involved in the theft and harassment that Team Plasma's Grunts carry out. Getsus wants to keep N's hands clean, to preserve his idealism and his image as a pure-hearted liberator. If N knew that Team Plasma was stealing Pokemon for their own use rather than freeing them, it might trigger the kind of questioning that Getsus wants to avoid. So N remains somewhat isolated, appearing at key moments to challenge the player, but not participating in the day-to-day criminal activities of the organization. The turning point in N's journey comes when Team Plasma's plan enters its final phase. Getsus has determined the location of either the Lightstone or Darkstone, depending on which version of the game is being played. In Pokemon White, it's the Lightstone that contains Reshiram. In Pokemon Black, it's the Darkstone that contains Zekrom. Team Plasma tracks the stone to Dragon Spiral Tower, an ancient structure sacred to the Dragon-type Pokemon of Unova. N is sent to Dragon Spiral Tower to awaken the legendary dragon. This is the moment Getsus has been preparing him for his entire life. N climbs the tower, reaches the summit, and confronts the dormant stone. The dragon inside responds to N's conviction, to his absolute belief in his ideals, and it awakens. Reshiram or Zekrom emerges from the stone, fully formed and ready to bond with the trainer who summoned it. N successfully captures the legendary dragon, giving Team Plasma the ultimate weapon in their quest to control Unova. But the player arrives at Dragon Spiral Tower just as this is happening. They witness N awakening the dragon, see him claim this legendary Pokemon as his own. And N, now armed with the most powerful Pokemon in the region, tells the player that everything is about to change. He's going to challenge the Pokemon League, defeat the champion, and use his position of absolute authority to declare that all trainers must release their Pokemon. With a legendary dragon at his side, no one will be able to stop him. This is when the player realizes the full scope of what Team Plasma has been planning. This isn't just about giving speeches and trying to convince people. Team Plasma intends to use force to impose their ideology on Unova, whether people agree with it or not. N might believe he's doing the right thing, that he's saving Pokemon from suffering, but the method he's chosen is authoritarian. He's going to take away people's choice and force them to live according to his beliefs. N battles the player again at Dragon Spiral Tower, but this time something is different. The player's Pokemon have grown significantly stronger. They've bonded more deeply with their trainer through shared experiences and challenges. And when N listens to what these Pokemon are saying, he can't deny what he's hearing anymore. These Pokemon genuinely care about their trainer. They're not brainwashed. They're not suffering. They've chosen this partnership, and they're happy with their choice. This creates a crisis for N. Everything Getsis taught him, everything he believed about the world, is being contradicted by direct evidence from the Pokémon themselves. N's entire identity is built on the idea that he's the one person who can truly understand Pokémon, who can hear their real feelings. But if the Pokémon are telling him they're happy with their trainers, and he's still insisting they need to be liberated, then he's not listening to Pokémon at all. He's imposing his own beliefs on them, exactly the kind of behavior he claims to oppose. N doesn't have time to fully process this contradiction. He's already committed to the plan. He's already awakened the legendary dragon. He's already challenged the Pokémon League. So he pushes forward, telling himself that once he's defeated the champion and implemented liberation across Unova, everything will make sense. The doubts will go away. The confusion will resolve itself. He just needs to follow through with what he's started. The player continues their journey, training and preparing for the inevitable confrontation at the Pokémon League. They defeat the 8 gym leaders of Unova, earning their badges and proving their skill as a trainer. And finally, they make the journey to the Pokémon League, ready to challenge the Elite Four and the champion. But they don't know that when they get there, they won't just be fighting for the title of champion. They'll be fighting to stop Team Plasma from taking over the entire region. N reaches the Pokémon League before the player does. He battles through the Elite Four with his legendary dragon, defeating them without significant difficulty. He then challenges Alder, the current champion of Unova, and defeats him as well. By the time the player arrives at the champion's chamber, N has already won. He's already the strongest trainer in the region, and he's ready to use that position to enforce Team Plasma's vision of liberation. But before the player can battle N, something happens that no one expected. The building begins to shake, the ground trembles and splits apart, and from beneath the Pokémon League, rising up from underground where it was built in secret, N's castle emerges. The massive structure that Getsis had been constructing throughout Team Plasma's entire campaign breaks through the earth and surrounds the Pokémon League building, creating a dark fortress that announces to everyone in Unova that Team Plasma's moment has arrived. The castle rising is a powerful symbol. It shows that Team Plasma has been planning this for a long time, that they have resources and capabilities far beyond what anyone suspected. It demonstrates their power and their willingness to use that power to reshape Unova according to their vision, and it traps the player inside, forcing them to confront N and Team Plasma in the heart of their stronghold. N waits inside the castle, in a throne room designed specifically for this confrontation. He has his legendary dragon. He has the title of champion. He has everything he needs to implement his plan. But he also has doubts, questions that have been growing with each encounter with the player, with each Pokémon he's heard that contradicted what he was taught to believe. And when the player finally reaches him, when they stand before him ready to battle, N has to decide whether to trust what Getsis taught him or trust what he's been hearing from Pokémon themselves. This is where N's journey of awakening reaches its critical point. He's about to discover that the person he trusted most in the world, the father figure who raised him and gave him purpose, has been lying to him from the beginning. And that revelation will shatter everything N thought he knew about himself and his mission. The inside of N's castle is designed to overwhelm. Long hallways stretch in impossible directions, decorated with symbols of Team Plasma's ideology. The 7 sages are positioned throughout the castle, waiting to deliver final speeches about liberation and the new world Team Plasma will create. Getsis's loyal followers patrol the corridors, ready to battle any intruders. And at the center of it all, in a massive throne room, N waits with his legendary dragon, The player has to fight their way through the castle to reach N. They battle Team Plasma grunts, who are more fanatical than ever, convinced that victory is at hand. They encounter some of the seven sages, who give speeches about how the world is about to change, how Pokémon will finally be free from human oppression. The atmosphere is triumphant on Team Plasma's side. They believe they've won. The castle has risen. N is the champion. Nothing can stop them now. But as the player progresses through the castle, talking to the various Team Plasma members and sages, cracks in the organization's unity become visible. Some of the grunts seem uncertain, questioning whether rising a castle and taking over the Pokémon League by force really aligns with the peaceful liberation message they were recruited with. Some of the sages, particularly Rude, seem troubled by how events are unfolding. There's a sense that not everyone in Team Plasma is comfortable with this final escalation. When the player finally reaches the throne room, N is there waiting. The room is enormous, designed for dramatic confrontation. N stands at the far end with his legendary dragon beside him. He doesn't attack immediately. Instead, he talks to the player, explaining his vision for the future. He tells them that he's going to become the hero, that he's going to create a world where humans and Pokémon are separated for the good of both species. He says that he's heard the voice of the player's Pokémon, and while they seem happy now, they'll be even happier when they're free. N challenges the player to prove him wrong. If the player can defeat him, if they can overcome the legendary dragon with a team of supposedly oppressed Pokémon, then maybe N's worldview is incorrect. But N doesn't really believe he can lose. He has a legendary dragon, the most powerful Pokémon in Unova. The player just has regular Pokémon caught in Pokéballs, supposedly suffering under human control. By all of Team Plasma's logic, N should win easily. But before the battle can begin, something extraordinary happens. The player is approached by another legendary dragon. In Pokémon White, if N has Zekrom, then Reshiram appears for the player. In Pokémon Black, if N has Reshiram, then Zekrom appears. The dragon recognizes something in the player, sees that they embody truth or ideals just as strongly as N does, and it offers itself to be caught. This is a pivotal moment in the story. The appearance of the second dragon means that the player isn't just a regular trainer challenging a legendary Pokémon. They're N's equal, someone chosen by a legendary dragon just as N was. The battle that's about to happen isn't between a liberator and an oppressor. It's between two people with different beliefs about how humans and Pokémon should coexist, both armed with equal power, both convinced they're right. N is shaken by this development. He didn't expect the player to be chosen by a dragon. Getsis told him he was special, the only one worthy of awakening a legendary Pokémon. But here's the player, standing before him with Reshiram or Zekrom at their side, proving that N isn't as unique as he thought. Still, N pushes forward. He has to see this through. He initiates the battle, legendary dragon against legendary dragon, with the fate of Unova hanging in the balance. The battle itself is one of the most significant moments in Pokémon Black and White. It's not just a gameplay challenge, though it certainly is that. It's a narrative climax where two philosophies clash. N believes that Pokémon should be free from Pokéballs, that training is exploitation, that humans and Pokémon can't truly coexist as partners. The player represents the counter-argument that Pokémon and trainers can form genuine bonds, that partnership isn't the same as oppression, that the relationship between human and Pokémon can be mutually beneficial and filled with love. When the player defeats N, it's not just a victory in battle. It's proof that N's entire worldview was built on a flawed foundation. The player's Pokémon, kept in Pokéballs, trained through battles, bonded to a human trainer, just defeated the legendary dragon that N thought would be unstoppable. If keeping Pokemon in Pokeballs made them weak or miserable, they shouldn't have been able to win. If training was abuse, the players' Pokemon should have been broken and unwilling to fight. But they weren't. They were strong, coordinated, and clearly fighting alongside their trainer by choice. N's response to losing is remarkable for how gracefully he accepts it. He doesn't rage or make excuses. He doesn't claim the battle was unfair or demand a rematch. Instead, he listens to what the players' Pokemon are saying, really listens without trying to rationalize it away, and he acknowledges that he was wrong. The Pokemon tell him they love their trainer, that they chose to stay in their Pokeballs, that they're happy with their life. And N, who has spent his entire life believing he could hear the truth from Pokemon better than anyone, finally accepts that truth even though it destroys everything he thought he knew. N begins to realize that he's been manipulated. The Pokemon he grew up with, the ones that told him humans were cruel, weren't a representative sample. They were deliberately selected by someone who wanted N to hate trainers. His entire childhood, his entire belief system, was engineered by someone with an agenda, and the person who did this to him was the one he trusted most. This is when Getsis appears. He's been waiting in the throne room, hidden in the shadows, watching the battle. When N loses and begins to question everything, Getsis steps forward, and instead of comforting N or trying to maintain the deception, Getsis reveals the truth. He tells N that he was just a tool, a freak who could talk to Pokemon and nothing more. He tells N that the entire liberation ideology was a lie designed to make people release their Pokemon so that Getsis could rule Unova unopposed. Getsis's speech is cruel and calculated. He mocks N for being naive enough to believe the liberation message. He calls N a freak without a human heart. He explains that he raised N specifically to be the kind of person a legendary dragon would choose, but that N himself was never meant to matter beyond his usefulness in the plan. Everything N believed about being chosen, about having a sacred mission, about Getsis caring for him as a father, it was all manipulation. Getsis never cared about N. He only cared about power. The revelation is devastating for N. In a matter of minutes, he's lost a battle he thought he couldn't lose, discovered that his core beliefs were wrong, and learned that his father figure was actually using him as a pawn. Everything that defined his identity has been stripped away. He's not a hero. He's not special. He was just a convenient tool for someone else's ambition. But Getsis isn't finished. Even though N has been exposed as a fraud and defeated in battle, Getsis still has his own Pokemon team. He challenges the player directly, not bothering with pretense or ideology anymore. He just wants to eliminate the threat the player represents and take control of Unova by force. If manipulation and deception won't work, then raw power will have to suffice. The battle against Getsis is notably harder than the battle against N. Getsis' team is built for victory, not for proving a philosophical point. His Hydreigon is particularly dangerous, a high-level dragon and dark type with a moveset designed to counter common strategies. Getsis doesn't hold back. He's not trying to teach a lesson or test the player's bond with their Pokemon. He's trying to win by any means necessary. When the player defeats Getsis, the full extent of Team Plasma's collapse becomes apparent. The plan has failed. The legendary dragon chose the player instead of following N exclusively. N himself has turned against the organization's goals after learning the truth. And Getsis, the mastermind behind everything, has been defeated in battle by a young trainer from Nuvema Town. Team Plasma's moment of triumph has become a total disaster. The aftermath of the battle is chaotic. Getsis is furious, unable to accept that his plan failed. The seven sages are scattered throughout the castle, some fleeing, some surrendering, some still trying to understand what just happened. Team Plasma grunts throughout Unova hear that their leader has been defeated and their entire ideology was based on lies. The organization that seemed so powerful just hours ago is falling apart. N has his own reckoning to face. He releases his legendary dragon, acknowledging that he wasn't worthy of it, that he summoned it under false pretenses. He tells the player that he needs to leave, to go somewhere far away and think about everything he's learned. He's lost his purpose, his beliefs, his understanding of the world. He needs time to figure out who he is when he's not the person Getsis made him to be. Before N leaves, he has a final conversation with the player. He tells them that he's grateful they showed him the truth, even though it hurt. He acknowledges that the player's Pokémon genuinely love them, and that the bond between trainer and Pokémon can be real and positive. He doesn't know what he'll do next or where he'll go, but he knows he can't stay in Unova. There's too much here that reminds him of the lies he believed and the harm he almost caused. N walks away from the castle, from Team Plasma, from everything that defined his life. Getsis is taken into custody. The seven sages scatter, with some being arrested and others going into hiding. The castle that rose so dramatically from beneath the Pokémon League stands as a monument to Team Plasma's failed ambitions. And the player, now officially the champion of Unova, has to process what they just experienced and what it means for the region's future. 2 years pass between the events of Pokémon Black and White and their sequels, Black 2 and White 2. During those 2 years, Unova changes significantly. The player from the first games has left the region, their journey complete. A new champion takes their place. Cities grow and develop. Routes change as construction projects reshape the landscape. And Team Plasma, the organization that nearly took over the entire region, fractures into two opposing factions. The split in Team Plasma happens because the organization's members had different reasons for joining and different reactions to learning the truth about Getsis's deception. Some members genuinely believed in Pokémon liberation. They joined Team Plasma because they thought they were helping Pokémon, fighting against a system that exploited and abused creatures who couldn't defend themselves. When they discovered that Getsis was lying, that liberation was never the real goal, these members were horrified. They felt betrayed and used, and they wanted nothing more to do with Team Plasma's original mission. These true believers, led by some of the former Seven Sages, particularly Rude, formed what could be called the Reformed Team Plasma. They abandoned the organization's name and its goals, instead dedicating themselves to actually helping Pokémon who had been hurt or abandoned. They set up shelters and care facilities. They worked to rehabilitate Pokémon that had been abused. They tried to make amends for the harm Team Plasma had caused during its rise to power. Rude became a central figure in this reformed group. He had always been the sage most concerned with Pokémon welfare, the one who genuinely believed Team Plasma's stated mission was righteous. Learning that Getsis had been lying devastated him, but it also motivated him to do better. Rude gathered other former Team Plasma members who shared his regret and his desire to help Pokémon legitimately, without the manipulation and deceit that characterized the organization under Getsis. But not all Team Plasma members abandoned the organization's goals. A significant number remained loyal to Getsis, either because they agreed with his actual objective of domination, or because they didn't care whether the liberation message was sincere, as long as they benefited from Team Plasma's power. These members reformed under a new banner, calling themselves Neo Team Plasma, and they waited for an opportunity to resume the plan Getsis had started. The ideological division between these two groups was stark. The reformed members believed they had been tricked into supporting evil and wanted to atone. The Neo Team Plasma members believed they had been on the verge of victory before being stopped by the player, and they wanted to finish what they started. The reformed members wanted to help Pokémon. Neo Team Plasma wanted to control Unova. Both groups came from the same organization, but they stood for completely opposite principles. Getsis himself disappeared during this 2-year period. After his defeat, he was supposed to be in custody, facing justice for Team Plasma's crimes. But somehow he escaped or was freed, the details never made entirely clear. What is clear is that he spent those 2 years planning his return, developing a new strategy that wouldn't rely on N or the liberation ideology. If deception and manipulation couldn't give him control of Unova, then raw power would have to suffice. The Neo Team Plasma that emerged under Getsis' renewed leadership was different from the original organization. They dropped the pretense of being liberators. They stopped giving speeches about Pokémon rights and freedom. Their new uniforms were more militaristic, designed to intimidate rather than to evoke religious or moral authority. They acted openly as a criminal organization, stealing Pokémon and resources, attacking anyone who opposed them, and making no effort to justify their actions with ideology. This new approach was more honest in some ways. The original Team Plasma had been built on lies, manipulating people into supporting goals they didn't understand. Neo Team Plasma made no such claims. They were villains. They knew they were villains, and they didn't care who knew it. Getsis had abandoned the careful manipulation that defined his first attempt at conquest in favor of brutal directness. But Getsis still needed powerful Pokémon if he wanted to control Unova. He'd lost access to N, and the legendary dragon N had awakened. He needed a new source of ultimate power, something that could give him the edge he needed to succeed where he'd previously failed. And he found it in Kyurem, the third dragon from Unova legend, the empty husk that had been left behind when the original dragon split into Reshiram and Zekrom. Kyurem had been living in the Giant Chasm, an isolated area in northern Unova. It was known to be there, but it was left alone because it seemed incomplete, damaged, not nearly as powerful as its counterparts. But Getsis had a plan for Kyurem that would change everything. If he could make Kyurem whole again, or at least more complete than it currently was, it would become a weapon capable of freezing all of Unova into submission. To accomplish this, Getsis employed a scientist named Colress. Colress was brilliant, amoral, and fascinated by the question of how to bring out Pokémon's maximum potential. He didn't care about Team Plasma's goals or Getsis's ambitions. He cared about research, about pushing Pokémon to their limits and seeing what they were capable of. Getsis offered him resources and freedom to experiment in exchange for his scientific expertise, and Colress accepted. Colress developed technology that could control Pokémon, forcing them to battle even against their will. This was a significant departure from Team Plasma's original methodology. The old Team Plasma claimed that Pokémon should be free from human control. Neo Team Plasma, under Colress's influence, was doing the exact opposite, using technology to override Pokémon's autonomy and turn them into unwilling soldiers. The hypocrisy was blatant, but Getsis didn't care. He'd never believed in liberation anyway. The reformed Team Plasma members, watching Neo Team Plasma's activities from a distance, were appalled. This wasn't just a betrayal of the organization's stated ideals. It was the exact kind of Pokémon abuse that the liberation message had claimed to oppose. The reformed members tried to stop Neo Team Plasma's operations where they could, providing information to authorities and intervening when they encountered Neo Team Plasma in the field. But they were limited in what they could accomplish because they were still associated with Team Plasma's crimes from 2 years earlier. The general public of Unova had complicated feelings about both groups. Many people had been fooled by original Team Plasma's liberation message, and they felt angry and betrayed when the truth came out. Some had released their Pokémon based on Team Plasma's persuasion, and they regretted it deeply once they learned they'd been manipulated. The appearance of Neo Team Plasma, openly criminal and aggressive, reinforced the sense that Team Plasma had always been evil and that anyone who supported them had been naive or foolish. But the reformed Team Plasma members complicated this narrative. Here were people who had been part of the organization, who had believed in liberation, and who were now dedicating themselves to genuinely helping Pokémon. They didn't make excuses for what they'd done under Getsis's leadership. They acknowledged that they'd been wrong and that they'd caused harm. But they were trying to make amends, and some people in Unova appreciated that effort, even if they couldn't fully forgive Team Plasma's past actions. The Seven Sages had split along the same lines as the rest of the organization. Rude led the reformed faction, working to rehabilitate abused Pokémon and help former Team Plasma members transition to legitimate lives. Zinzolin, however, remained loyal to Getsis and became one of Neo Team Plasma's commanders. He was involved in some of the new organization's most aggressive operations, showing no remorse for the pain Team Plasma had caused or the lives it had disrupted. Other sages had different fates. Some went into hiding, trying to escape justice for their role in Team Plasma's crimes. Some were arrested and imprisoned. A few, like Rude, actively worked against Neo Team Plasma and tried to undo the damage the organization had caused. The unity that had characterized the Seven Sages during Team Plasma's first rise to power was completely shattered, replaced by bitter division and mutual recrimination. Getsis himself remained the driving force behind Neo Team Plasma, but he was different after his defeat. He'd suffered a psychological blow when the player defeated him, when his perfect plan fell apart and N turned against him. He'd lost the calm, calculating demeanor that made him so effective as a manipulator. Now he was more volatile, more openly cruel, more desperate to succeed, even if it meant taking extreme risks. His obsession with controlling Unova had intensified, becoming less about rational ambition and more about proving he couldn't be beaten. This changed Getsis made mistakes he wouldn't have made before. He became predictable in his aggression. He underestimated opponents because he was so focused on his own superiority. He pushed his subordinates too hard, creating resentment even among his loyal followers. The cold, methodical villain who had nearly conquered Unova through careful planning had been replaced by someone more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. As Neo Team Plasma executed operations across Unova, stealing Pokémon and gathering resources, they worked toward Getsis's ultimate goal, capturing Kyurem and using it to freeze the region into submission. The reformed Team Plasma members tried to warn authorities about this plan, but they had limited credibility given their history. And so Neo Team Plasma advanced toward its objective, setting the stage for a confrontation that would determine Unova's fate for the second time in just 2 years. The fracture of Team Plasma represented something larger than just one organization falling apart. It showed that people who join movements for idealistic reasons can react very differently when they discover those ideals were false. Some people double down, refusing to admit they were wrong and finding new justifications for their actions. Others recognize the deception and work to make amends. And some simply walk away, wanting nothing more to do with the cause that betrayed them. Team Plasma's split demonstrated all of these responses, creating a more complex and morally nuanced situation than the simple good versus evil narrative of the first games. Getsis's plan for his return centered on a device called the DNA splicers. This ancient artifact had the power to fuse Kyurem with either Reshiram or Zekrom, creating a hybrid dragon that would be more powerful than any of the three dragons individually. The DNA splicers had existed in Unova legend for as long as the story of the original dragon, a tool that could partially restore what had been split apart thousands of years ago. Getsis had learned about this device during his research into the legendary dragons, and he'd made obtaining it a priority for Neo Team Plasma. The DNA splicers were hidden, protected by their own legend, and by people who understood how dangerous they could be in the wrong hands. But Neo Team Plasma had resources and determination. They tracked down the location of the splicers and stole them, giving Getsis the tool he needed to make Kyurem into the ultimate weapon. With the splicers in hand, all Getsis needed was Kyurem itself and one of the other legendary dragons to fuse it with. Kyurem lived in the Giant Chasm, a massive crater in northern Unova filled with ice and snow year-round. The area was dangerous and difficult to access, which had kept Kyurem isolated and relatively safe from human interference. But Neo Team Plasma had prepared for this. They established a base in the Giant Chasm, set up equipment to contain and control Kyurem, and prepared to capture the dragon when the time was right. Colress played a crucial role in this plan. His technology could force Pokémon to obey commands even if they didn't want to. For a legendary Pokémon like Kyurem, which had its own will and would not simply submit to being captured, this technology was essential. Colress developed a specialized version of his control device specifically for Kyurem, something powerful enough to override even a legendary dragon's resistance. But Getsis needed more than just Kyurem. The DNA splicers required two dragons to function: Kyurem and either Reshiram or Zekrom. N had taken his dragon and disappeared after the events 2 years ago. The player who defeated Getsis had the other dragon, but tracking down that player and stealing their legendary Pokémon would be difficult and risky. Getsis needed another approach. This is where the new player character enters the story. In Pokémon Black 2 and White 2, a new trainer from Aspertia City begins their journey across Unova. This trainer is younger than the hero from 2 years ago, just starting out with their first Pokémon. They have no connection to the previous conflict with Team Plasma and no knowledge of what happened at N's castle. They're simply a kid who wants to become a strong trainer and challenge the Pokémon League. But this new player becomes involved with Team Plasma almost immediately. Neo Team Plasma is operating openly across Unova, causing trouble in multiple cities. The player encounters them repeatedly throughout their journey, battling Neo Team Plasma grunts and disrupting their operations. Each time, Neo Team Plasma seems to be searching for something or someone, and their activities become more aggressive as time goes on. The player also encounters members of the reformed Team Plasma during their journey. These former members explain what happened 2 years ago, how Team Plasma was built on lies, and how it fractured after Getsis's defeat. They warn the player that Neo Team Plasma is planning something dangerous, something involving the legendary dragons, but they don't know the full details of Getsis's plan. They just know it's bad and that someone needs to stop it. Throughout the game, the player also crosses paths with a character named Hugh. Hugh is another young trainer from Aspertia City, someone the player has known since childhood. But Hugh has a personal vendetta against Team Plasma that goes beyond just stopping their criminal activities. 5 years ago, when Hugh was very young, Team Plasma stole his sister's purloin. This was during Team Plasma's first rise to power, when they were still pretending to be liberators and stealing Pokémon under the guise of setting them free. Hugh's sister loved that purloin. Losing it devastated her, and she never fully recovered from the loss. Hugh watched his sister suffer, and he's carried anger about it ever since. When he learned that Team Plasma was back and active again, he became obsessed with finding the people responsible for stealing his sister's Pokémon and making them pay. Hugh's quest for revenge runs parallel to the player's journey, and the two of them repeatedly encounter Neo Team Plasma together. Hugh represents the personal cost of Team Plasma's actions. The organization's crimes weren't just abstract harm to society or threats to regional stability. They hurt real people, broke real bonds, and caused real trauma. Hugh's sister lost a Pokémon she loved, and Hugh lost the happy sister he remembered from before the theft. That pain drives Hugh throughout the entire game, making him more aggressive and less forgiving than the player character. As the player progresses through their journey, earning gym badges and growing stronger, Neo Team Plasma's activities escalate. They take over multiple locations, including the Plasma Frigate, a massive flying ship that serves as their mobile headquarters. From this ship, they coordinate operations across Unova, staying one step ahead of authorities and making it difficult for anyone to track their movements or predict their next target. Zinzolin commands many of Neo Team Plasma's field operations. He's ruthless and efficient, showing none of the ideological pretense that characterized Team Plasma's first campaign. When the player encounters Zinzolin, he doesn't try to convince them that Neo Team Plasma has good intentions. He simply battles them and tries to stop them from interfering with the organization's plans. Zinzolin believes in Getsis's vision of domination, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to make that vision a reality. Colress, meanwhile, maintains his position as Neo Team Plasma's chief scientist and strategist. But his relationship with the organization is different from the other members. He doesn't particularly care whether Getsis succeeds or fails. He's interested in the research, in the question of how to maximize Pokémon potential and how to control powerful Pokémon like Kyurem. He works for Neo Team Plasma because they give him resources and opportunities to pursue his research, not because he shares their goals. This makes Colress an interesting antagonist. He's not evil in the traditional sense. He's amoral, pursuing knowledge without regard for the consequences. When he battles the player, it's not because he wants to stop them from interfering with Neo Team Plasma's plan. It's because he wants to test his theories about Pokémon's strength and see if the player's methods can overcome his technological approach to Pokémon control. The player eventually learns about Neo Team Plasma's plan to capture Kyurem and use the DNA splicers to fuse it with another legendary dragon. The reformed Team Plasma members provide some information, and Colress himself explains parts of the plan during encounters with the player, treating it like an interesting scientific experiment rather than a dangerous scheme that could freeze all of Unova. But there's a problem with Getsis's plan that becomes apparent as it unfolds. He needs either Reshiram or Zekrom to fuse with Kyurem, and he doesn't have either dragon. N is gone, his location unknown. The original player character who defeated Getsis has left Unova, taking their legendary dragon with them. The dragons aren't simply available for Getsis to capture. He needs someone to summon one of them first, someone the dragons would recognize as worthy. This is where Getsis's plan becomes desperate and reckless. He decides that if he can't get a legendary dragon through legitimate means, he'll force one to appear. He believes that if he captures Kyurem and creates a big enough crisis, if he threatens Unova severely enough, one of the legendary dragons will appear to oppose him. And when it does, he'll use Colress's technology to control it, then fuse it with Kyurem using the DNA splicers. It's a plan based on desperation rather than careful calculation. The old Getsis, The methodical manipulator, who spent years preparing N and building Team Plasma's influence, wouldn't have relied on such uncertain variables. But the new Getsis, damaged by his previous defeat and obsessed with proving he can't be beaten, is willing to take risks that his former self would have recognized as foolish. Neo Team Plasma executes the plan step by step. They establish control over the giant chasm, driving away any trainers or Pokémon that might interfere. They set up Colres's control device, the specialized technology designed to dominate even a legendary Pokémon's will, and they prepare to capture Kyurem, the final piece they need before the DNA splicers can be used. The player, meanwhile, continues their journey, getting closer and closer to the truth of what Neo Team Plasma is planning. They battle through Neo Team Plasma's forces, encounter Hugh multiple times as he pursues his own vendetta, and receive warnings from the reformed Team Plasma members about the danger that's coming. Everything is building toward a confrontation at the giant chasm where Getsis will make his move, and where the player will have to stop him before Kyurem is turned into a weapon capable of freezing all of Unova into submission. The stage is set for the final battle, but there are still unknown variables. Where is N, and will he return when Unova needs him? Which legendary dragon will appear, Reshiram or Zekrom? And can the player, who is younger and less experienced than the hero who defeated Getsis 2 years ago, stand against a villain who has become more dangerous and unpredictable in his desperation? The answers to these questions will determine whether Unova falls under Getsis's frozen rule, or whether Team Plasma's second attempt at conquest ends the same way as their first. The reformed Team Plasma members operate from the shadows, working to undo the damage their organization caused, while avoiding the authorities who still see them as criminals. They're led primarily by Rude, the former sage who genuinely believed in Pokémon liberation and who was devastated when he learned the truth about Getsis's manipulation. Rude has dedicated the past 2 years to helping Pokémon that were hurt or abandoned, trying to make amends for his role in Team Plasma's crimes. Rude's group isn't large, and it's not well funded. They operate out of makeshift shelters and donated spaces, relying on the goodwill of people who believe they're genuinely trying to change. They take in Pokémon that have been abused or neglected, providing medical care and rehabilitation until the Pokémon can be returned to the wild or found new trainers who will treat them properly. It's humble work, nothing like the grand ambitions of liberating all Pokémon that Team Plasma once proclaimed. But it's honest and it helps real Pokémon in measurable ways. The player encounters members of reformed Team Plasma multiple times throughout their journey. These former members still wear modified versions of the old Team Plasma uniform, but they've changed the colors and removed the organization's symbols, trying to distance themselves from what Team Plasma represented while acknowledging their past. When they meet the player, they're apologetic and helpful, providing information about Neo Team Plasma's activities and warning about the danger Getsis represents. One of the most significant encounters with reformed Team Plasma happens in Driftvale City. The player finds former Team Plasma members caring for Pokémon in a house they've converted into a shelter. The Pokémon there are in various states of recovery, some with visible scars from abuse, others simply traumatized and needing time to heal. The reformed members explain that these are Pokémon they've rescued from bad situations, including some Pokémon that Neo Team Plasma had stolen and discarded when they weren't useful. Rude appears at this shelter and speaks directly to the player. He explains his regret about Team Plasma's actions and his determination to spend the rest of his life trying to make up for the harm he helped cause. He tells the player about the other former sages, how some have been arrested, how others have gone into hiding, and how Zinzalin has fully committed to serving Ghetsis' renewed ambitions. Rude warns the player that Neo Team Plasma is more dangerous than the original organization because they've abandoned all pretense of morality and are operating purely through force and intimidation. But Rude also provides hope. He tells the player that not everyone who was part of Team Plasma was evil, that many members were manipulated just like N was, and that people can change if they're willing to face the truth about their past actions. This message is important because it complicates the simple narrative of Team Plasma as purely villainous. Yes, the organization did terrible things. Yes, Ghetsis was and remains a dangerous criminal. But the individual people who made up Team Plasma's ranks were complex, with varying degrees of knowledge and responsibility for what happened. Hugh's story runs parallel to the player's journey, but is driven by much more personal stakes. While the player is trying to become a strong trainer and eventually stop Neo Team Plasma's schemes, Hugh is focused entirely on finding his sister's stolen purloin and making the people who took it pay for what they did. This singular focus makes Hugh more aggressive and less measured than the player. He doesn't care about the bigger picture of Team Plasma's plans or their ideology. He cares about his sister and the Pokémon that was stolen from her. Hugh's first significant encounter with Neo Team Plasma happens early in the game, and it sets the tone for his entire arc. When he sees Team Plasma grunts, he doesn't hesitate or try to reason with them. He immediately challenges them to battle, demanding they tell him where the stolen Pokémon are and who ordered the thefts 5 years ago. The grunts don't have answers for him because most of them are new recruits who weren't even part of the organization during its first campaign. But Hugh doesn't care. To him, anyone wearing a Team Plasma uniform is responsible for what happened to his sister. The player and Hugh cross paths repeatedly, often finding themselves battling Neo Team Plasma together, even though their motivations are different. Hugh appreciates the player's help, but he also makes it clear that this is personal for him in a way it isn't for the player. He's not just trying to stop criminals or save Unova. He's trying to get justice for his sister, to find the people specifically responsible for her pain and make them answer for it. As Hugh learns more about Team Plasma's history and structure, his understanding of what happened to his sister's purloin becomes more complicated. He discovers that Team Plasma stole thousands of Pokémon during their first campaign, all under the guise of liberation. His sister's purloin wasn't special or specifically targeted. It was just one of many Pokémon that Team Plasma took, convinced trainers to surrender, or stole outright. This realization doesn't make Hugh less angry, but it does force him to confront the scale of what Team Plasma did and how many people were hurt by their actions. Hugh also learns about the split in Team Plasma, about how some former members are now working to help Pokémon rather than exploit them. This creates a dilemma for him. He wants revenge against Team Plasma, but not all Team Plasma members are his enemies anymore. Some of them regret what they did and are actively trying to make amends. Hugh has to decide whether his anger extends to everyone who was ever part of the organization, or whether he can distinguish between the true believers who left and the loyalists who stayed with Ghetsis. One of the most emotional moments in Hugh's story comes when he encounters a reformed Team Plasma member who was actually present when his sister's purloin was stolen. This former member remembers the incident, remembers being part of the group that convinced Hugh's sister to give up her Pokémon, and remembers how devastated she was. The former member apologizes to Hugh, explaining that they genuinely believed at the time that they were helping Pokémon and that learning the truth about Ghetsis' lies has haunted them ever since. Hugh has to choose how to respond to this apology. He can accept that this person was manipulated and is genuinely sorry, or he can reject the apology and hold on to his anger. The game doesn't force a specific choice on the player, But Hugh's character development throughout the story suggests that he begins to understand the complexity of the situation. The people who stole his sister's Pokémon weren't all malicious. Some of them thought they were doing good. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it does change what justice looks like. The reformed Team Plasma members and Hugh represent two different types of response to Team Plasma's crimes. The reformed members focus on making amends, on helping Pokémon, and trying to undo the damage their organization caused. Hugh focuses on accountability, on finding the people responsible and making sure they face consequences for their actions. Both approaches are valid, and both are necessary for Unova to heal from what Team Plasma did. As Neo Team Plasma's plan advances and the threat to Unova becomes more immediate, the reformed members and Hugh find themselves working together despite their different priorities. The reformed members provide intelligence about Neo Team Plasma's operations, using their knowledge of the organization's structure to predict where Getsis will strike next. Hugh provides motivation and determination, his personal vendetta driving him to pursue Neo Team Plasma more aggressively than anyone else would. Rude becomes a mentor figure to both the player and Hugh, providing guidance and context for what they're facing. He explains how Getsis operates, what his weaknesses are, and what kind of person he is beneath the manipulative facade. Rude knows Getsis better than almost anyone except N, having served as one of his sages for years. This knowledge becomes crucial as the player prepares to face Neo Team Plasma's final gambit. The reformed Team Plasma members also help protect civilians from Neo Team Plasma's more aggressive operations. When Neo Team Plasma attacks a town or steals Pokémon from trainers, reformed members often arrive to help with evacuation or to battle the Neo Team Plasma grunts and minimize the damage. They're trying to be what they thought Team Plasma was supposed to be, protectors of Pokémon and people who stand up against cruelty and exploitation. But the reformed members face constant suspicion and hostility from the public. Many people in Unova remember Team Plasma's first campaign, remember being lied to and manipulated, and they don't trust anyone associated with that organization, regardless of whether they've renounced their past. Some cities refuse to let reformed Team Plasma members enter. Some trainers attack them on sight, seeing the modified uniforms and assuming they're enemies. The reformed members accept this treatment as part of their penance, understanding that trust has to be earned back slowly. Hugh, meanwhile, gets closer to finding answers about his sister's purloin. He tracks down several Neo Team Plasma members who were part of the original organization during the theft, battling them and demanding information. Most of them don't remember one specific purloin from 5 years ago, but they remember the general operations, the locations where stolen Pokémon were kept, and the people who ordered the thefts. Hugh pieces together a picture of what happened, and all roads lead back to Getsis. This realization crystallizes Hugh's understanding of the situation. Getsis is responsible not just for his sister's pain, but for all the pain Team Plasma caused to countless families across Unova. Hugh's personal vendetta becomes part of a larger mission to stop Getsis before he can hurt anyone else. His motivation is still personal, still rooted in his sister's suffering, but he begins to see himself as fighting for everyone who was victimized by Team Plasma, not just for his own family. As the player, Hugh, and the reformed Team Plasma members all converge on the same goal of stopping Neo Team Plasma's plan, they form an unlikely alliance. They don't all trust each other completely. They don't all agree on what should happen to Neo Team Plasma members when they're caught, but they all recognize that Getsis has to be stopped, and that stopping him will require everyone working together regardless of their different motivations and histories. The Giant Chasm is one of the most remote and inhospitable locations in Unova. It's a massive crater filled with perpetual snow and ice, home to powerful ice-type Pokémon and treacherous terrain that makes travel difficult even for experienced trainers. At the center of this frozen wasteland lives Kyurem, the incomplete dragon that was left behind when Reshiram and Zekrom split from the original dragon thousands of years ago. For most of Unova's history, Kyurem remained in the giant chasm undisturbed, a lonely remnant of ancient power. But Neo Team Plasma has transformed the giant chasm into a fortress. When the player arrives, they find the area crawling with Neo Team Plasma grunts and equipment. The organization has set up barriers, established checkpoints, and created a perimeter that keeps out anyone who might interfere with their plans. At the heart of this operation is Chorus's control device, a massive piece of technology designed specifically to dominate Kyurem's will and force the legendary dragon to obey Ghetsis' commands. The player has to fight through waves of Neo Team Plasma members to reach the center of the giant chasm. Hugh is there too, battling his way forward with single-minded determination. The reformed Team Plasma members provide what assistance they can from outside the perimeter, but they can't enter the heavily guarded area without being captured or killed. The final confrontation will come down to the player, Hugh, and whatever help arrives from unexpected sources. As the player pushes deeper into the giant chasm, they encounter Zinzalin commanding Neo Team Plasma's forces. Zinzalin is completely loyal to Ghetsis, believing that this plan will finally give them the power to control Unova. He battles the player with everything he has, using ice-type Pokémon that are perfectly suited to the frozen environment. But the player defeats him, and Zinzolin retreats further into the chasm, warning that they're too late to stop what's about to happen. At the deepest part of the giant chasm, the player finds Ghetsis standing before Kyurem. The legendary dragon is already trapped by Chorus's technology, unable to resist the commands being transmitted through the control device. Kyurem's body is frozen in place, its eyes showing confusion and resistance, but the technology is too powerful. The dragon that should be free and autonomous has been reduced to a weapon waiting to be used. Ghetsis sees the player arrive, and he's not surprised. He expected someone to try to stop him, just like someone stopped him 2 years ago, but this time, he's prepared. He has Kyurem under his control. He has the DNA splicers. All he needs now is for one of the other legendary dragons to appear, and he's created exactly the kind of crisis that should summon one. A legendary Pokémon being threatened, a villain attempting to freeze all of Unova. This is the kind of situation where a hero with a legendary dragon would intervene. And Ghetsis is right. A presence appears in the giant chasm, powerful and unmistakable. It's N, returned to Unova after 2 years of absence, and he has his legendary dragon with him. In Pokémon Black 2, N has Reshiram. In Pokémon White 2, he has Zekrom. The dragon that sided with N during the events 2 years ago has stayed with him, traveling wherever he went, remaining loyal even after N released it from any obligation to fight for him. N's return is shocking for everyone present, but especially for Ghetsis. N was supposed to be gone, broken by the revelation of Ghetsis' manipulation, wandering the world trying to understand who he was without the lies he'd been raised to believe. But N came back. He came back because Unova needed him, because Kyurem was in danger, because Ghetsis was trying to use the legendary dragons for evil again. N has changed during his 2 years away, but his core desire to protect Pokémon from harm hasn't changed at all. N confronts Ghetsis directly, telling him that he won't allow the legendary dragons to be used as weapons. He challenges Ghetsis to battle, ready to stop his former father figure with force if necessary. But Ghetsis doesn't battle N directly. Instead, he activates the DNA splicers while Kyurem is still under the control device's influence. The ancient artifact begins to glow, and Kyurem starts to change. The fusion happens before N can stop it. Kyurem and N's dragon are pulled together by the Splicer's power, merging into a single being. In Pokemon Black 2, Kyurem fuses with Reshiram to become White Kyurem. In Pokemon White 2, Kyurem fuses with Zekrom to become Black Kyurem. The resulting fusion is more powerful than either dragon individually, a massive ice dragon with elements of fire or electricity flowing through its body. It's incomplete, asymmetrical, clearly not the natural form this power was meant to take, but it's devastatingly strong, and it's under Ghetsis' control. Because Kyurem was being controlled when the fusion happened, the resulting White Kyurem or Black Kyurem is also subject to the control device. Ghetsis now commands a legendary fusion dragon, exactly what he needed to freeze Unova into submission. He stands before the player and N with absolute confidence, certain that nothing can stop him now. N is horrified. His dragon, the Pokemon that chose him 2 years ago and stayed with him through everything, has been forcibly fused with Kyurem and is being controlled against its will. This is exactly the kind of Pokemon abuse that N dedicated his life to fighting against, and it's happening to his own partner. He tries to reach his dragon, to break through the control and help it resist, but the technology is too strong. The fusion dragon follows Ghetsis' commands, unable to hear N's voice or respond to their bond. Ghetsis orders the fusion dragon to attack, to demonstrate its power and show everyone present what happens to those who oppose him. The dragon unleashes a devastating ice attack that freezes part of the giant chasm solid, creating walls of ice and dropping the temperature even further. The display of power is meant to break the player's will, to show them that resistance is futile and that Ghetsis has already won. But the player doesn't back down. They challenge Ghetsis to battle, ready to face the fusion dragon despite the impossible odds. This is the moment when the player character demonstrates the same courage and determination that the previous hero showed 2 years ago. They're younger, less experienced, and they don't have a legendary dragon of their own. But they have their team, the Pokemon they've trained and bonded with throughout their journey, and they're going to fight with everything they have. Ghetsis accepts the challenge, eager to prove his superiority and crush the last resistance to his plan. He sends out the fusion dragon, White Kyurem or Black Kyurem, expecting an easy victory. The dragon is level 70, enormously powerful, with stats that surpass almost any Pokemon the player could have trained. It has access to devastating ice-type moves and either fire or electric attacks depending on which dragon it fused with. By any reasonable assessment, the player shouldn't be able to win. But the battle isn't just about power levels and type advantages. It's about the bond between trainer and Pokemon versus force control through technology. The player's Pokemon are fighting because they want to, because they trust their trainer and believe in what they're doing. The fusion dragon is fighting because it's being forced to, its will overridden by Colress's device, and that difference matters. The player battles the fusion dragon with everything they have. It's one of the hardest fights in the entire game, requiring strategy, preparation, and often some luck. The fusion dragon can knock out Pokemon in single hits if the player isn't careful. Its defenses are strong enough that even super effective attacks don't do as much damage as they should. And Ghetsis is a skilled trainer despite his villainy, using items and switching tactics when his initial strategy fails. But the player can win through persistence, through the strength of their bond with their Pokemon, through refusing to give up even when the situation seems hopeless. The player can defeat the fusion dragon. And when they do, something remarkable happens. The control device begins to fail. The technology that was forcing Kyurem and N's dragon to obey Ghetsis wasn't designed to maintain control over a fusion form during the stress of battle. The defeat weakens the device's hold, and the fusion dragon starts to resist. N uses this moment to reach his dragon, calling out to it, reminding it of their bond and their shared experiences. The dragon hears him, responding to N's voice even through the technological interference. The connection between N and his dragon, built over years and strengthened by mutual respect and trust, proves stronger than Kolres's control device. The fusion dragon breaks free from Getsis's command, the device sparking and failing as the dragon reasserts its own will. Getsis watches in disbelief as his ultimate weapon turns against him. The fusion dragon, no longer controlled, refuses to follow his orders. It turns to N, acknowledging their bond, showing that even after being forcibly fused and controlled, it still remembers who its true partner is. This is the moment when Getsis's plan completely falls apart, when all his schemes and all his technology fail because he never understood the one thing that actually matters in the Pokémon world: genuine connection between Pokémon and humans. The DNA splicer's effect begins to reverse. Without the control device maintaining the fusion, the merged dragon starts to separate back into Kyurem and N's dragon. The process is dramatic, energy crackling around both Pokémon as they return to their individual forms. When the separation is complete, Kyurem is free from the control device, and N's dragon returns to his side, exhausted but intact. The fusion that Getsis forced has been undone, and both dragons are free. Getsis stands in the center of the giant chasm, surrounded by his broken technology, his scattered forces, and his failed plan. Everything he worked toward has collapsed. The fusion dragon is separated. His control device is destroyed. The player has defeated him again. And N, the tool Getsis spent years creating and manipulating, is standing against him with a legendary dragon at his side. For the second time, Getsis has lost everything. But unlike his defeat 2 years ago, Getsis doesn't accept this loss with calculated composure. Something breaks in him. The psychological damage from his first defeat, the obsession that drove his return, the desperation that made him take increasingly reckless actions, it all comes crashing down at once. Getsis begins to rant, his careful facade of superiority shattering to reveal the damaged, obsessed person underneath. He screams at N, calling him a freak again, blaming him for ruining everything. He screams at the player, demanding to know why they keep interfering with his destiny to rule. He screams about how he should have won, how he deserved to control Unova, how everyone who opposed him was wrong and foolish and deserved to be frozen and subjugated. The cold, calculating villain who manipulated an entire region has been reduced to someone having a complete mental breakdown in the snow. The player battles Getsis one final time. Unlike the fight at N's castle 2 years ago, where Getsis still had some composure and strategy, this battle is desperate and erratic. Getsis's team is still powerful, his Hydreigon still dangerous, but his commands are less precise, his strategy less sound. He's fighting from a place of rage and desperation rather than calculated malice, and it shows in how the battle unfolds. When the player defeats Getsis, he collapses. Not just physically, though he does fall to his knees in the snow, but mentally and emotionally, he's broken in a way that goes beyond simple defeat. He mutters to himself, barely coherent, cycling between rage and confusion. He can't process what's happened to him, can't accept that he's been beaten twice by children, can't reconcile his belief in his own superiority with the reality of his total failure, and approaches Getsis, the man who raised him, who manipulated him, who used him as a tool, and then discarded him when he was no longer useful. There's no anger in N's expression, just sadness and pity. He tells Getsus that he forgives him, not because what Getsus did was acceptable, but because N has learned during his 2 years away that holding on to anger and hatred only causes more pain. N has found peace by letting go of his resentment, and he offers that same peace to Getsus, even though Getsus doesn't deserve it. Getsus doesn't respond coherently to N's words. He's too far gone, too damaged by his defeats and his inability to accept them. Members of the International Police, who have been tracking Neo Team Plasma's activities and arrived at the giant chasm during the final battle, take Getsus into custody. He doesn't resist. He barely seems to recognize what's happening. The man who wanted to rule Unova is led away in restraints, broken and defeated. The fate of the 7 sages is varied and reflects their different levels of involvement and remorse. Zinzolin, Getsus's most loyal follower, is arrested alongside him. He remains defiant even in defeat, insisting that Getsus' vision was right and that they were only stopped by luck and interference. Zinzolin shows no remorse for his actions, no recognition of the harm Team Plasma caused. He's taken into custody and will face justice for his role in both of Team Plasma's campaigns. Rude, who led the reformed faction, is treated very differently. While technically he could be prosecuted for his role in the original Team Plasma, authorities recognize that he's been actively working against Neo Team Plasma and helping Pokémon for the past 2 years. Rude is allowed to continue his work with the Pokémon shelter, operating under supervision but not imprisoned. He accepts this outcome with humility, understanding that he's fortunate to be given the chance to continue making amends. The other sages face various consequences based on their actions during the 2-year gap. Some who went into hiding are tracked down and arrested. Others who surrendered voluntarily and cooperated with authorities receive lighter sentences. A few, like Rude, are allowed to continue their redemption work under monitoring. The 7 sages who once commanded Team Plasma's operations are scattered to different fates, united only in the recognition that the organization they served is finished forever. Hugh's story reaches its own conclusion in the aftermath of the battle. He never finds his sister's specific purloin. The Pokémon was released or rehomed years ago, lost in the chaos of Team Plasma's first collapse. But Hugh does find closure in a different way. He confronts former Team Plasma members who were involved in the thefts from 5 years ago, and they apologize to him directly. They explain that they genuinely thought they were helping Pokémon at the time, that they've carried guilt about the pain they caused, and that they understand if Hugh can never forgive them. Hugh has a choice to make. He can hold on to his anger, let it define him and consume him, or he can accept that the people who hurt his sister were themselves victims of Getsus's manipulation. It's not an easy choice, and the game doesn't force a specific resolution. But Hugh's character development throughout the story suggests he begins to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what happened. It means choosing not to let that pain control his life anymore. Hugh returns to Aspertia City and tells his sister what he learned. He explains that the people who took her purloin were lied to and manipulated, that they thought they were doing good, and that they're sorry for what happened. His sister, who has lived with the loss for 5 years, tells Hugh that she's grateful he tried to find her Pokémon, but that she's moved on, and he should too. She got a new Pokémon partner during the years Hugh was obsessed with revenge, and while she still misses her purloin, she's not defined by that loss anymore. Hugh realizes that his quest for revenge was partly about his own anger, not just about helping his sister. N's future after the battle is left somewhat open. He tells the player that he's going to continue traveling, searching for Pokémon who have been hurt by humans and helping them heal. He's dedicated himself to being what he thought he was supposed to be all along, someone who truly listens to Pokémon and advocates for their well-being. But unlike his time with Team Plasma, N now understands that not all human and Pokemon relationships are harmful, that genuine bonds of love and respect are possible, and that his role isn't to separate humans from Pokemon, but to help ensure those relationships are healthy. N thanks the player for showing him the truth and for stopping Getsis twice. He acknowledges that the player's bond with their Pokemon is real and valuable, something he couldn't see when he was blinded by Getsis's lies. N's legendary dragon chooses to go with him as he leaves, not because it's forced or controlled, but because it wants to stay with N and support his mission. The dragon recognizes that N has grown and changed, that he's become someone worthy of partnership rather than someone who sees Pokemon as victims needing salvation. Before N departs, he has a final conversation with the player about the nature of truth and ideals. He reflects that the original dragon split because the two brothers couldn't reconcile their different philosophies, and that maybe the split was necessary because truth and ideals are both important but often in tension. N says that he still believes in his ideals, in a world where all Pokemon are happy and free, but he now understands that truth matters too, that he can't pursue his ideals while ignoring reality. He hopes that one day, someone will be able to reunify the dragons, to bring truth and ideals back together in a way that honors both. Colress, the scientist who designed the control device and enabled Getsis's plan, has perhaps the most ambiguous fate. He's questioned by authorities about his role in Neo Team Plasma's operations, but he maintains that he was only interested in the research, not in Getsis's goals. Colress argues that his technology could be used for good as well as evil, that the problem wasn't the control device itself, but how Getsis chose to use it. The authorities don't find this argument particularly convincing, but Colress is clever enough to avoid the most serious charges. Colress is released, but banned from conducting certain types of Pokemon research without oversight. He accepts these restrictions with equanimity, more interested in the data he gathered from the fusion experiment than worried about legal consequences. Colress remains a morally gray figure, someone who enabled terrible things not because he was evil, but because he was indifferent to the ethical implications of his work. He represents the danger of pure scientific curiosity divorced from moral consideration, a theme that Pokemon games occasionally explore but rarely resolve clearly. The reformed Team Plasma members continue their work helping abused and abandoned Pokemon. They face ongoing suspicion from the public, but over time, their consistent actions and genuine remorse begin to change some minds. They'll never fully escape the shadow of Team Plasma's crimes, but they demonstrate that people who supported evil through ignorance or manipulation can choose to do better if they're willing to face the truth about what they enabled. Neo Team Plasma, as an organization, is completely destroyed. With Getsis captured and Zinzalin arrested, the leadership is gone. The grunts who were only following orders scatter, some disappearing into civilian life, others being arrested as authorities track down the organization's remnants. The plasma frigate is seized and repurposed. The bases and safe houses are shut down. Within weeks of the battle at Giant Chasm, Neo Team Plasma ceases to exist as a functional organization. Unova begins to heal from the damage Team Plasma caused, both from the original campaign and from Neo Team Plasma's recent activities. People who were manipulated into releasing their Pokemon work to find and recapture them or find new partners. Cities that were terrorized by Team Plasma's operations rebuild and strengthen their defenses. And the region as a whole learns lessons about the danger of charismatic leaders who claim to have simple solutions to complex problems. The player becomes champion of Unova, having defeated not just the Elite Four but also stopped a villainous organization from taking over the region. Their journey from Aspertia City to the Pokémon League paralleled the previous hero's journey 2 years earlier, proving that courage and genuine bonds with Pokémon can overcome even the most powerful threats. The player's victory isn't just personal achievement, it's a demonstration that the values Team Plasma tried to destroy, partnership between humans and Pokémon, are worth fighting for and strong enough to prevail. The story of Team Plasma ends with Ghetsis' capture and the organization's dissolution, but the questions it raised don't have such clean resolutions. Team Plasma's legacy in Unova is complicated, touching on themes of manipulation, redemption, the nature of truth and ideals, and what it means to genuinely care for Pokémon. Years after the events of Black 2 and White 2, the impact of Team Plasma's rise and fall continues to shape the region and the people who lived through it. One of the biggest unanswered questions is what happened to N after he left Unova the second time. The games show him departing after the battle at Giant Chasm, heading off to continue his mission of helping Pokémon, but they don't reveal where he went or what he did next. N appears briefly in later games, showing up in different regions and seeming to have found a measure of peace, but the details of his journey remain mysterious. What we know is that N is still traveling with his legendary dragon, still listening to Pokémon voices, and still working to help Pokémon who have been hurt or abandoned. But the specifics of how he does this, where he goes, and what he's discovered about himself and the world in the years since leaving Ghetsis behind are left to player imagination. Some fans theorize that N is searching for the truth about his origins, trying to understand who his real family was before Ghetsis took him. Others believe he's working to rehabilitate Pokémon affected by Team Plasma's actions, making amends in his own way for the harm the organization caused. The question of N's biological family is itself a mystery. Ghetsis called himself N's father, but it's never confirmed whether this was literal or just another manipulation. N's full name, Natural Harmonia Gropius, suggests some connection to the Harmonia family, but who that family was, whether they're still alive, and how N came to be raised by Ghetsis instead of his birth parents remains unexplained. Some theories suggest that N might be Ghetsis' actual son, that the cruelty Ghetsis showed him was directed at his own child. Others think N was kidnapped or adopted specifically because he had the ability to hear Pokémon voices, making him useful for Ghetsis' plans. The nature of N's ability itself raises questions. He can genuinely hear and understand Pokémon in a way that normal trainers cannot. This isn't just empathy or careful observation. N can have actual conversations with Pokémon, understanding their specific thoughts and feelings. Where did this ability come from? Was he born with it, or did it develop because of how he was raised? Are there other people in the Pokémon world with similar abilities, or is N truly unique? The games never provide answers, treating N's gift as simply part of who he is, without exploring its origins or implications. The original dragon, the being that split into Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem, remains one of the great mysteries of Pokémon lore. The DNA splicers can fuse Kyurem with one of the other dragons, but this creates an incomplete fusion, an asymmetrical form that clearly isn't what the original dragon looked like. What would happen if all three dragons were fused together? Would the original dragon be restored, or is too much lost for that restoration to be possible? And if the original dragon could be restored, would it be sentient, with its own will and personality, or would it simply be a combination of the three current dragons? Game Freak has never shown us the complete original dragon or suggested that such a fusion is possible within the game mechanics. This could be a mystery they're saving for a future game, perhaps a continuation of the Unova storyline, or a remake that expands on the Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem mythology. Or it could be a mystery that's meant to remain unsolved, a legendary being from ancient times that can never be fully restored because the split was too fundamental and too complete. The philosophical question at the heart of Team Plasma's story also remains unresolved. Were they right about anything? The organization was built on lies and manipulation, but the core question they raised, whether keeping Pokémon in Pokéballs and making them battle is ethical, is one the games never definitively answer. The games clearly present the player's relationship with their Pokémon as positive and wholesome, but they also acknowledge that not all trainers treat their Pokémon well, and that abuse exists within the trainer system. Team Plasma's liberation ideology was false in its application because Getsus never intended to actually free Pokémon, but that doesn't necessarily mean the underlying concerns were entirely invalid. The games show Pokémon that have been abandoned, abused, or mistreated by their trainers. They show that Pokeballs can be used to trap Pokémon against their will, that battles can be harmful if trainers are reckless or cruel, and that the power dynamic between human and Pokémon creates potential for exploitation. Team Plasma twisted these legitimate concerns into propaganda, but the concerns themselves weren't entirely fabricated. The reformed Team Plasma members grapple with this question in their own way. They rejected Getsus's lies and his quest for power, but some of them still believe that Pokémon deserve better treatment than they often receive. They work to help abused Pokémon, to educate trainers about proper care, and to intervene when they see Pokémon being mistreated. In a sense, they're trying to pursue the ideals that Team Plasma claimed to represent without the manipulation and ulterior motives that corrupted the original organization. Getsus's ultimate fate is known but not detailed. He was taken into custody after his mental breakdown at Giant Chasm, but what happened to him after that? Is he imprisoned, receiving treatment for his psychological damage, or has he completely withdrawn into madness? The games don't show Getsus again after his capture, leaving his final state ambiguous. Some players imagine him locked away, still muttering about his failed plans and his hatred for N and the player. Others think he might have recovered enough to face trial and imprisonment, spending the rest of his life paying for Team Plasma's crimes. There's also the question of whether Getsus could ever be redeemed or if he's too far gone for redemption to be possible. N forgave him, but forgiveness isn't the same as redemption. Redemption requires the person who did wrong to acknowledge their actions, feel genuine remorse, and work to make amends. Getsus has never shown any of these qualities. Even in his defeat, he blamed others and insisted he should have won. His mental breakdown suggests psychological damage rather than moral awakening. Whether he's capable of the self-reflection and change that redemption would require is an open question. The Seven Sages present a spectrum of culpability and redemption. Rude represents one end, someone who genuinely believed in a false ideology and who has dedicated himself to making amends after learning the truth. Zinzalin represents the other end, someone who knew Team Plasma's real goals and supported them anyway, showing no remorse even in defeat. The other sages fall somewhere between these extremes, with varying degrees of knowledge, complicity, and willingness to change. Their different fates reflect the complexity of judging people who participated in an organization built on deception. Colress represents perhaps the most troubling question of all. What do you do with someone who enables evil without being evil themselves? Colress didn't care about Getsus's goals. He didn't want to rule Unova or hurt Pokémon out of malice. He simply wanted to pursue his research, and he was willing to work for anyone who would give him the resources to do so. His control device could have had legitimate applications, helping injured Pokémon or protecting people from dangerous Pokémon. but he created it for Getsis, knowing it would be used to force Pokémon to fight against their will. Is Colress guilty of Team Plasma's crimes because he provided the technology that enabled them, or is he just a scientist who can't be held responsible for how his inventions are used? The games don't provide a clear answer. Colress faces some consequences, but not the same level of punishment as Getsis or Zinzalin. He continues his research under restrictions, still fascinated by questions of Pokémon potential and control. Whether he learned anything from his experience with Team Plasma or simply sees it as an interesting failed experiment is left ambiguous. The impact of Team Plasma on Unova society extends beyond the immediate damage they caused. The organization changed how people think about their relationships with Pokémon, forcing trainers to examine whether their partnerships are truly mutual or whether they're taking advantage of Pokémon who can't easily refuse them. This self-examination is healthy, even though Team Plasma's motives for prompting it were not. The region emerged from the crisis with a more conscious appreciation for the bonds between humans and Pokémon, and a greater awareness of the responsibility trainers have to treat their Pokémon well. Team Plasma also demonstrated the danger of charismatic leaders who claim to have simple solutions to complex problems. Getsis's liberation message was appealing because it reduced morality to a simple binary. Keeping Pokémon in Pokéballs is wrong, releasing them is right. This simplicity made people feel like they could easily be on the right side of a moral issue without having to think deeply about nuance or context. But reality is rarely that simple, and the people who fell for Team Plasma's message learned a hard lesson about the importance of critical thinking and skepticism toward movements that promise easy answers. The question of whether Team Plasma could rise again someday is one that Unova has to consider. Getsis is captured, but the factors that allowed Team Plasma to gain influence still exist. There are still Pokémon that are mistreated. There are still people who feel powerless and want to be part of something larger than themselves. There are still charismatic individuals who might see Team Plasma's approach as a template for gaining power through manipulation. Unova has to remain vigilant, to remember what happened, and to resist future attempts to exploit genuine concerns for selfish purposes. The legacy of Team Plasma is ultimately a reminder that good intentions aren't enough, that movements must be judged by their actions and their actual outcomes rather than their stated ideals. Team Plasma claimed to want liberation, but sought domination. They claimed to speak for Pokémon, but used Pokémon as weapons and tools. They claimed to be working toward a better world, but left behind trauma, division, and pain. The true measure of their legacy isn't in what they said they stood for, but in the harm they caused and the lessons Unova learned from stopping them. And somewhere in the world, N continues his journey, carrying those lessons with him, trying to be what Team Plasma pretended to be. Someone who genuinely listens to Pokémon and works to make their lives better. His quest might never be complete. The questions about his past might never be fully answered, and the dream of reunifying the original dragon might never come to pass. But N keeps going anyway, driven not by Getsis's lies or Team Plasma's false ideology, but by his own genuine desire to understand Pokémon and help them thrive. In that sense, something good emerged from Team Plasma's story after all, even if it took tremendous pain and 2 regional crises to get there.